Welcome to the Monos Pod. My name is Tino, and that's Matt. What's up, Matt?
How's it going?
It's good, man. Been a while.
Yes, yes. Looking forward to the season. It's
Me too.
even though the Browns are in it, my heart's with baseball. So
Is it Deshaun or Joe Flacco that your heart's with?
no comment. All I can say is Flacco makes me feel young.
Right? So for those of you who haven't listened to the Monos Pod, we cover minor leaguers and basically the fantasy value of minor league baseball players. We are starting our ranking series, doing catchers today. We will do 1 through 10, talk about catcher dynasty fantasy ranks and kind of the state of the position and our approach to this particular position within dynasty baseball. First glance, what's your thought when you think catchers in 2024 dynasty for minor leaguers?
Um, I would back up first as far as strategy because that's all dependent on strategy. So for me, the big thing as far as strategy goes is there's a big difference between how catchers are evaluated by MLB scouts and versus fantasy baseball. So you get like a Jefferson Caro, that guy's 70 arms, 70 field. He's going to be high in the ranks for MLB, but low in fantasy, right? Because you don't necessarily get the the offense there. And then the big thing here, I checked this out with Yadier Molina. I asked you last night, is he going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer?
Mm-hmm.
And he probably is. But if you compare him to first ballot Hall of Famers, you have like Ortiz, Jeter, Rivera, Holiday, Chipper, and then you got Ivan Rodriguez, who actually was an offensive star catcher, Griffey, Johnson. These are all players who are, top 20 fantasy players.
Right.
Yadier, some seasons he's not even going to be drafted, or he's a
Right.
free agent. So there's a huge difference between a modern catcher and how they're valued in MLB versus fantasy. And that affects the way we look at ranks too, like where you have scouts giving input in BA or just baseball or pipeline. They're going to be ranked based on their defense. So when it comes to fantasy, I think there needs to be caution about how these players are viewed, even by analysts that we have access to.
Right. I couldn't agree more. So Molina, his high for home runs in a season is 22 or was 22. And his high for RBIs in a season was 82. Right. So you're talking about 22 home runs, 82 RBIs. This was in separate seasons, but those were his highs. Now he was a 300 hitter, but as we know in fantasy, 300 hitter is not necessary. It can be very empty and not worth a whole lot. And I think you're right. Unless you're reading a strictly fantasy baseball analysis of a catcher, it is really important to pay attention to whether the value is wrapped up in their offense and defense or just their offense. I will say too, as I think we saw a little bit less of it last year, but as we see players become more versatile, right? Like if MJ Melendez was to catch 10 games as an example, or the minimum number of games to be eligible in your league, but has 500 at-bats in the outfield, that becomes much more valuable fantasy-wise, that player that has that eligibility because of the previous year or because they catch periodically. Like if Mitch Garver, as an example, who signed a two-year, $24 million contract with the Mariners, if Garver catches the minimum number of games for the Mariners this season, he's going to be provided health, a 500 plate appearance DH, which becomes hugely valuable in fantasy. I look at this my list of top 10 catchers in the minors, and a guy like Ethan Salas, who's 17, uber prospect for the Padres, he's going to stay a catcher, but his bat is good enough, and they're probably going to protect his legs enough that I'm guessing he catches 90 to 100 games, but then DHs or plays first or left field or something like that for another 40 because his bat is so valuable. So I think it is the conversation for each individual player as to what position. It's more important to talk about what position we think they will end up playing ultimately, and if there are going to be additional positions as well. half of my list are players who I think who are question marks to stick at catcher, but carry tremendous value if they move and keep that catcher eligibility.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
I think the other big thing is you move from comparison to MLB and fantasy. I think there's an issue within or a difference within fantasy too, dynasty versus redraft.
yes, absolutely.
So in dynasty, you're looking for elites, right? You're looking for top five players at each position. There's no way in a redraft you could fill all positions in the top five, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's just laid out each year that way. But in dynasty, you can aim for that. So you're looking for in dynasty the elite catcher. So when we're looking at these lists, we're looking for ones that could potentially be in that top tier.
How many do you have in that tier? If you like first glance,
two. Potential. I would have three if one of them sticks at catcher.
I assume you question whether Basayo sticks at catcher then.
Exactly, yes.
Okay. So let's dig in. I know we have different number ones just based on what we our kind of preliminary conversation about the position. Who is your number one dynasty catcher?
My number one dynasty catcher, and this is why I'm not wearing my Mariners cap, I don't want to seem overly biased here, is Harry Ford.
Mm-hmm.
First round pick, number 12, 2021, a catcher, a rare instance of a catcher drafted out of high school. He's 5'10", 200, very, very athletic, probably one of the most athletic catchers coming out in the modern game. He's fast. It's interesting that most have him at 60 speed for a catcher, but it is interesting. The top 60 he ran was 4.4 something. And in comparison to another player that is fast, a 70 speed, Max Clark coming out this year was 4.33. So,
Sure.
So he's been clocked anywhere from 4.4 to 4.6 on his 60. It's fun once these players come up to see how they run on Savant, since we don't get that the sprint speed there. So he is that type of player that could differentiate your fantasy catcher versus other fantasy catchers. He may also gain other position eligibility. So bringing up your point about Garver, that may be in the future as well. I think he's also somebody that suffered from prospect fatigue. He's been here for a while. We forget how young he is. So he's still 20 years old. He played 20 years old all last year in high A. So he's 20 going against the average age. Other hitters are 22 and a half. The pitchers are 23. So he's 3 years younger than everybody there. Incredible eye. This is one of the things he was drafted for. So his walk rate was 18.3% last year. He got his K rate under 20%. He was 19.4. His on base percentage is always over 400. So I think another aspect of a catcher is where are they going to bat in the lineup, right? Sure. I actually like Bo Naylor a lot, but is Bo Naylor going to be at the end of that lineup every year? I want somebody that's going to be at the top of the lineup. That OBP, he'll be there. The one critique he's gotten, and I think this is a little unfair, is, and you'll see this a lot with kind of the trends within prospects, is his hard hit rate, right? Mm-hmm. So it's under 30. His average EVs don't stand out. But if we go back to the number one catcher a few years ago, Adley Rutschman was under 30%. Right. He's a patient, passive hitter sometimes. That's going to affect their approach. But the interesting thing about Ford, so he went to the AFL. His max EVs on his first 2 home runs in the AFL were 108, 109. Mm-hmm. So he can hit it hard when he wants to. Right. And I think the last thing I'll say about this is the when he wants to. What's fascinating about him, he did great in the WBC, clutch moments there for playing for Great Britain. These stats, and I wanted to look this up because I watched him a lot last year on TV at Everett. In the 8th and 9th inning, he hit 7 home runs. So wow. Just about half of his home runs. He had a 600 slug in the 8th and 9th
Wow.
innings last year. In the WBC in clutch moments, or with the world watching, his slug was 856. So I think sometimes, and he doesn't hit the ball on the ground, right? So he has a nice launch. Sometimes he hits it in the air too much with his speed, but I think sometimes the critique of somebody's power isn't taking into consideration kind of the context of that.
Right.
So I think he can hit for power when he wants to.
So what does a peak Harry Ford season look like to you? Because I think when we're looking at these high upside catchers and we're ranking the top couple and we're kind of searching for that elite catcher to keep on your team, what does that season look like for Harry Ford where he's clearly differentiating himself from everybody else?
Well, in an OBP OPS league, I think he could be above 800 at OPS. His power may not get him in the high 800s, but his OBP is, and I think he'll be able to hit enough to be in the 800s with his slug to get his slug over 400. I think his floor is 10 to 15 home runs, 20 steals. His ceiling is 20 steals, 20 home runs. If he's batting at the top of that lineup or in a good spot, he's going to get you a lot of counting stats, which is also important for catchers. He may be that catcher that could play, 140 games versus, 110. So he's somebody you could stick in there and just leave there and not necessarily worry about the catcher position all year.
Right. I agree. So a couple things that I have here with Ford. I have him number 2. I don't disagree with anything you said. He is that modern day hitter in that his pull percentage last season in Everett was 49%, and his fly ball percentage was 36.6%. So a below 40% ground ball rate. So he's pulling fly balls, right? Modern day hitter, incredible eye, as you spoke of. 410 on base percentage last year. My first question with the high on base percentage or high walk percentage minor leaguer is, do they have enough power to punish a major league pitcher who grooves fastballs, right? Because we have these light hitting, high walk rate minor leaguers come up to the majors and they just get busted in with fastballs over and over again, and their on base percentage goes in the toilet because they can't hit a strike, right? Harry Ford's not that guy, so that's a check mark in the positive for me. I do think he was downgraded because his versatility was seen as a pro, but it pushed people to question whether he is a catcher because he was so versatile. It wasn't because he didn't have the tools to be a great catcher defensively. It was because he could do other things as well. And I think he got downgraded for that. And that was unsubstantiated in my mind. The questions that came from that athleticism, I compared to a really athletic quarterback like a Lamar Jackson, who is still a really great quarterback, but he just happens to be really freaking fast, right? And so people want to push him to be a running back or a wide receiver because he doesn't fit in that mold. And I think Harry Ford suffered from a little bit of that as well, where he was so athletic and so fast that people assumed he couldn't play catcher because of it. So now I think he's answered those questions. He's built like a tank, right? He's 5'10". He's listed at 200. I'm guessing he's closer to 210 if you look at him, and it's all in his thighs. That to me is a catcher, right? That's an old school catcher build. And I think his upside to me is a near 400 on base percentage catcher who can hit 25 home runs. He has that kind of lift and pull side power. I don't think he'll get to 400, but when you start thinking about a 400 on base percentage catcher with mid-20s home runs, that's Adley Rutschman territory, right? And he won't hit for the same type of average that Rutschman does, because Rutschman is probably has a hit tool that's maybe 2 grades above Harry Ford. If you give Harry Ford a 50 or 55, you're giving Rutschman a 60 or a 65. But he would do that with potentially, as you said, 20 steals. Now, I think his stolen base count will go down as he gets older because the wear and tear of the catcher position, the Mariners if he sticks with the Mariners, are going to want to preserve his legs to a certain extent, right? And stealing bases is not what you want your catcher to be doing. But I think at least early on in his career, you'll see the steals up here. right? And the homers might be right here. And I think as he gets older, you'll see it shift a little bit more where he's running less and hitting for some more power. But I have no problems with him at 1. I think he's, like I said, he's my number 2. I think he's immensely talented. I don't have any questions about him sticking at catcher. The only reason why he would move if he stays within the Mariners organization is the presence of Cal Raleigh.
I was just going to ask you about that.
And I think the Mariners are smart enough of an organization where, and Raleigh's bat is good enough, at least from the left side against right-handed pitching, that you would have them potentially share the catcher position, and then the other player DH most of the time, right? And that would fit with the Garver timeline signing the 2-year contract as well. So that's, if you're planning in the future, that's what I think the Mariners would do. I also think that Ford is expendable to a certain extent. It would have to be for a haul because I think he's proving to be a very valuable piece. But if the Mariners need a cornerback, as they do currently, and they're not willing to spend the money to get that cornerback, I think you could see Ford go and deal, but they would have to ask for a ton in order to trade him. Who is your number 2?
Yeah, and I suspect he's your number 1, Ethan Salas.
So
you want to talk about Salas?
Sure. So Ethan Salas was the big bonus international signing in last year's international free agent class. He was signed by the Padres. Ethan Salas is a wonder kid. He is 17 years old. He made it to freaking Double-A last year. He was signed for $5.6 million, or 5.825 was the base signing pool. Left-handed swing. He caught, was it Yu Darvish a little bit in like instructs or something like that? Like, they're pushing him as hard as you've ever seen a player push, but they believe he has the mentality and maturity to handle it. So he's 17. He's 6'2", 185, left-handed swing, really smooth, quiet defensive catcher already. Like, just the prototypical, it's like a genius or a savant, essentially, at catcher, defensively. And offensively, if you watch him swing, he's got as beautiful, I will never compare anybody to Griffey, but he's got a beautiful left-handed swing. So you can see he just oozes talent, right? And he carries himself like a professional. He looks like he belongs on the field at 17. What I see when I look at him, and this isn't even necessarily his ceiling, but what I see from him is a 300, 400, 500 hitter, right? It's what I think Adley Rutschman is at his peak. It's what, the other names I have here are Johnny Bench and Buster Posey. It's the number 1 catcher for 8 years in fantasy. It's the catcher who has the type of bat that you cannot take him out of the lineup, right? You see him hit against lefties and he stays in there against breaking balls, right? He's a talent. It reminds me a little bit of, because growing up, I saw Griffey come up through the minors. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of that feeling. I'm not calling him Griffey, but that feeling of this guy is better than everybody already, right? At this age. I think even his floor, if he continues on this path, is like a 275, 360, probably 450 type of hitter with 20 home runs. And he's an athlete on top of it all. So the Padres, I don't know that I trust them 100% in development. I don't trust them to not deal away Ethan Salas when he's at his peak value for, a veteran star. But as of right now, as much as I love Ford. And I think the proximity of Ford makes a lot of sense to rank him 1, but I can't rank anybody above Salas because of the talent that Salas brings to the table and the fact that he is a surefire catcher, right? Every scout says he is absolutely a surefire catcher. So again,
a couple questions here.
What's that?
A couple questions here. So in relating to fantasy. So in our league, 15 keeper league, is he somebody you keep right now? Is he that good? And number 2, where would you have him in your top 100?
top 100 prospect ranks.
Mm-hmm.
Let
People are
me,
putting him in top 10.
I can bring that up for you. Looks like I had him at, so my initial rank right at the end of the season, I had him at 20. And the reason why I had him at 20 and not higher is that he's 17.
Mm.
And, I think you could make the case for other 17-year-olds like a Felton Celestin, right? You can say he's athletically so much more gifted than so many other players at shortstop, and he's explosive and all these things. The difference with Salas is that he has shown it, right, in the minor leagues already. I also think that catcher is really scary to invest, and this is part of why I have him down at 20 and why I wouldn't necessarily invest in him as heavily as others have, is catchers get hurt, right? Catchers get bad knees at 21. Catchers move off of the position because they have bad backs in their mid 20s. And so there's no guarantee, although he looks every bit the part, every name on this list is not guaranteed to continue to catch for very many years because of the rigors of the position. And so I think in general, you have to kind of downgrade the value of this particular position because you don't know that they'll stay there. MJ Melendez was strictly a catcher coming up. And when I had him, a year and a half ago on my team, and I planned to keep him, it was Melendez is going to catch, right? Melendez is going to catch and he's going to DH, and that's about it. And he might play a little bit of outfield. And now Melendez is a full-time outfielder without catcher eligibility, right? So all his value is in the tank. So to answer your question, no, I don't. Personally, I would not keep Salas myself in our 15-team hybrid keeper league, our 15-player keeper 16-team league. But I think it behooves each team to identify one or two young players who are absolutely elite and hold on to them for dear life, right? For me, that's Tamar Johnson. And if Salas is your guy, then I understand, but catcher's just not the position for me to do it because you don't know what's going to happen with them. We'll talk about it at 3 with Basayo. It's the same idea. Mm-hmm. And while Basayo is much more likely to move off of catcher, Salas is 2 years younger, 2+ years younger, and could get, he could become 6'2", 230 and look like a linebacker and end up at first base and not have the mobility to catch. So I think it's too unpredictable for me. What do you think?
Yeah, I think for me it's the age that's the big thing as far as, let's see what the scouts, I trust the scouts. I trust what they're saying about him, but let's see him perform. And I think he was rushed maybe a little bit last year, just because of the superstardom that's associated with him. But in A-ball, against people 4 years older than him, his WRC plus was 122, right? As a 17-year-old. So I just want to see more of that develop. For me, that differentiating catcher is a big deal. So if I didn't, I have Adley on my team, so I really don't need to invest, but I would consider keeping him maybe as the 14th or 15th keeper, just because down the line he's going to differentiate my team with others when we go head to head.
Well, if you're looking at the list of prospects, right, and we think that each team in our 16-team league should be rolling the dice on at least one, potentially two potential elite prospects every single year, right? You should be keeping at least one or two. It's how you make your team great. We've had this conversation ad nauseum. Salas is one of those 16, right? Salas is one of those 32, no doubt. No doubt he is. He's just not my cup of tea. Not because I don't love him as a player, because I absolutely do. It's because of the position he plays and because of the proximity, right? His proximity to the major leagues. Now, one could make the case he's going to be there at the same time as, a couple of the guys on my top 10 because he's going to move so quickly, and he may, but I don't know that he hits. If he comes up at 19, is he going to be a fantasy asset, or is he going to be up there to catch, be okay with the bat, and continue to learn that way, right? So you have to think about that too. as when Dalton Rushing comes up and he's 23 years old and physically developed and has played in college and has a couple years in the Dodgers system, he's probably going to come up and hit right away. They're not bringing him up purely for his defense. He's going to come up and hit versus a Salas who they may say, they want to develop the relationships with the pitchers and we're going to let your bat develop over time.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else from you on Salas? I assume he's your number 2.
Yeah, he's my number 2.
All right, let's take.
I have tons of international guys on here.
Do you really?
I only have 3 draftees.
Nice. This is going to be fun. Let's take a quick break. We will come back with number 3. We'll move quickly through 3 to 10, and then talk about a little bit about the guys that are just off the list, like your boy Kevin Parada. We'll be right back.